do it. Welcome to Donor Stewardship, keeping donors interested and engaged during COVID and beyond. This is one of the things that was super requested when we surveyed all of the grantees. So lots of folks interested in talking about this one. So we're going to start with just our basic introductions. For those of you who have been through Fundraising Fridays, I will go quick, I promise, about Progressive Multiplier and who we are and how we can help you with all things independent revenue generation. Then we're going to get into what is stewardship. I figure we can't talk about COVID stewardship without having a baseline agreement and understanding and discussion on what should stewardship actually entail. And then how has COVID and the pandemic and everything else we've been through in the last now year really changed how we approach donor stewardship? And then we'll open it up for questions, and we'll have some discussion points throughout. So, is there anything on that you feel like we aren't going to cover that's in your initial stewardship questions in this agenda? I can always adjust on the fly. And Jazz, I of course can't see the chat, so if there's anything coming up.
Nope, all good in chat.
All right, we will dive on in. My name is Bethany Mackey. I'm the Managing Director here at Progressive Multiplier. And with me is Jasmine Kearse, my partner in crime in all things marketing and constituent engagement for Progressive Multiplier. Say hi, Jazz.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the webinar this afternoon.
And this is me with my pre-COVID hair. This is me with my hair now because I haven't been able to get a haircut. So somebody told me the other day I needed to get a new headshot. Yeah,
short to long. Mine was long to short.
You had the guts to cut yours, and every weekend I'm like, shut up. So yes, after I'm vaccinated and it is safe, that is my first indulgence is going to be getting my haircut because I miss short hair. I live in Florida. We are welcoming two groups of folks today. So we have our grantees who come through Packard and are working with the Resilience Initiative. And then we also have a group of grantees who are coming from the Leaders Trust, which is the new name for what used to be the Flexible Leadership Awards. And Leaders Trust is a project of Tide Center. They are working on their new logo, so this will look pretty in about a month. Would love for you guys to introduce yourselves to each other in the chat with your name, organization, and role. These calls always get a really diverse crew. So we have some development directors, we end up with some volunteers, some executive directors. So everybody is welcome. We just like to always have a handle on what organizations we have on the phone and who does what. So it helps us tailor our content. We will be recording the session. It will not be posted publicly. Both Resilience Initiative and the Leaders Trust have portals through which these recordings are accessible, but they are password protected. But if you have any questions or concerns about that, please give me a holler. All right, 30-second overview of Progressive Multiplier, because I know we have a lot of returning crew here on the phone. So Progressive Multiplier is a funding intermediary, and we deal with funding fundraising experiments and revenue generation experiments. Our basic theory of the problem we're trying to solve is that, progressive nonprofits are largely philanthropically and institution supported. And if that was enough, they would have all achieved their missions already. We obviously have a long way to go. So we know that progressive nonprofits really need help building their own independent revenue generation engines for that flexible and more financing. So what we do is we find folks that are doing great experimentation that have a potential of coming up with a 2-to-1 returning revenue generation tactic. We fund that with some different kinds of grants and financing and market rate loans, and then we drive supporters and dollars to their missions, and we are transparent about sharing what works and what doesn't and all the good stuff and the fail forwards. And hopefully, if we do our jobs right, evolving everything towards a more just society. So that's our shtick. We work with grantees in 3 portfolio areas: achieving justice, realizing democracy, and restoring the environment. We are focused on groups that are systemic change oriented right now. We are 2 years into our journey as a funding intermediary. So we do not fund direct service organizations that only do direct service. Some of our grantees do direct service as a part of their broader civic engagement, advocacy, and systemic change missions. If you don't know if you fit grant criteria for us, please call Jasmine or I. We are happy to discuss your individual business case. And we are hoping to expand to direct service organizations as we grow. This is just our starting point. In the meantime, we do have free revenue generation resources for you, regardless of whether you're grant eligible for us or not. So Jasmine, can you chime in here about all things Center of Excellence?
Absolutely. So like Bethany said, we just have a ton of resources for you guys in the Center of Excellence. As far as registering for the Center of Excellence, we recently received a bulk list of names, and so look out for an automated email. It's going to help you guys finish registration by setting up your password. And so look out for that so you guys can get in and see the Fundraising Friday webinars. Again, those aggregate resources. We have case studies there for you guys to look at. And again, look out for the automated email. It's going to help you guys get into the Center of Excellence. Without that, you won't be able to access the recordings. If you have any questions about registration or just any type of problems logging in, make sure to email me, jasmine@progressivemultiplier.fund. And again, if some of you guys haven't received that email, you should get it by the end of the day. And follow up with me next week. Again, if you have any issues, I'm here to help.
Thanks, Jazz. The other thing you'll see when you log into the Center of Excellence, if you are grant eligible, you'll see the apply for a grant navigation point. And so we have 2 rounds of funding coming up. One is for any environmental justice groups on the phone, and we define environmental justice as really community-based, BIPOC-led, working in BIPOC serving communities where environmental injustices have been perpetrated. We are doing a second invite-only call for our second tranche of funding for our EJ cohort, and are looking for probably 4 more grantees. So if you fit those criteria and are interested or have any recommendations for me of great groups, please reach out, and happy to send an invite to apply. Our second and sort of broader next call will be for the second phase of our progressive stimulus project. This will likely be late spring, early summer. We are doing a lot of conversations with funders right now and looking at checks arriving in, probably April, May-ish. So we're in that time frame. The joys of funding intermediary life. We have to wait until we get the checks. We do not have an endowment. And then we will be able to start grant making. Progressive stimulus project funding will be open to anyone who would fall into our portfolios. No restrictions on that like we had during the first round of PSP funding. So if you have any questions, please reach out. Last thing, we have put these dates out both through Resilience Initiative as well as Leaders Trust, but just want to make sure you guys have them. We will be doing our next fundraising Friday on March 19th, and per our usual format, we'll do a deep dive on this topic using case studies or panel discussion, something else. So this will be a deeper conversation around donor stewardship and action. Our April topic is mid-major and planned giving. So we'll be looking at, that moves management for the, 20-ish% of your donors and how you do it. May, we'll be talking about your tech stack, so technology to really support fundraising program, what's out there, how do you vet it, nightmares that we've encountered, as well as really great things. And then in June, we're going to be talking about after the lightning in the bottle moment. So especially through the, I believe the Leaders Trust is going to be hosting a discussion with the National Immigration Law Center about how they captured lightning in a bottle after a lot of the movement around DACA during the Trump administration, and what they've done with those donors since then to build their file. And one of the reasons they were able to turn that into real revenue was they were ready for it. But that you can't you can't capture it if you aren't ready. So we're going to spend June talking about how to really fundraise around those news cycle driven moments. And then we're going to roll out a new offering in April and May, which are going to be limited slot by reservation deep dive sessions. And those topics will be TBD based on what you're interested in. But it'll, we're probably going to limit them to 5 or 6 folks and really do unscripted group discussions around a topic, and do some on the spot consulting. So any questions on our upcoming topics? Guys, let me know if there's anything fun in the chat.
All good.
All right. So let us dive into all things donor stewardship, what it is and what it isn't. I want to start out with a little bit of a discussion of how your organizations define donor stewardship. What does it mean to you when we say that? So would love to, you feel free to come off mute and volunteer for how does your organization define donor stewardship? I can start with what we do at Progressive Multiplier as a nonprofit for our donors. The way we define donor stewardship is really our current funders and as well as our other kind of VIP constituents, so our grantee partners, and then also just broader progressive movement thought leaders. Those are all folks who are in our stewardship pipeline. And we actually do communication track planning for each of those groups, and it involves digital communication as well as phone communication until a time when we can all be together again, as well as some special events like both virtual and in-person convenings around topics of interest. So how do you guys define donor stewardship, and what are you guys' organizations doing?
I can try to start us off. My name is Kayla Kumar. I'm the Development Director of Food What. Good to be here with you all.
Hey, Kayla.
Hi. So yeah, we're similar. Donors are anybody that is ready to step into their power by supporting the work that we do through Food What. So they might work at a foundation, they might be a community member that has $20 that they want to put to a good cause. This is everybody. And we too have a multi-channel communications approach. But we operate on a farm based in Santa Cruz, California and Watsonville, California. So we're very much a place-based. Understanding our work is very much being there with us. So we do what we call walk and talks on the farm. It's been difficult right about now, but I am not above a FaceTime on the farm.
Love it.
We're allowed up there. And then community, we're very much rooted in relationships, and we find really we're conduits for folks. People really care about young people. They care about their struggle. They care about their well-being. How are we identifying access points for them to really lean into that compassion and love that they have? We do that through events, again, where young people get to share their stories of empowerment, of their journey, and feel what it feels like to be heard by a collective of adults that perhaps they might not otherwise feel that way. So we have a kind of a space where it's a tool to meet a lot of ends, but it does generate a predominant amount of our individual donations. So maybe I'll stop there. I can go on, but I'll stop.
No, that's great, Kayla. Thank you so much. And I appreciate hearing about your missions and what you do. That's one of my favorite parts of working with the grantees, both from the Leaders Trust as well as the Resilience Initiative. Is the missions represented on the phone are varied and amazing. So anybody else want to share what you guys are doing in terms of how you define your donor stewardship program? All silent, nothing in chat.
I'll go. Hi, you all can hear me, correct?
Go ahead, Abiha. Yeah,
Hi,
absolutely. Welcome.
Thank you. So my name is Abiha, she, her pronouns. I work at Urge Unite for Reproductive and Gender Equity. We define, right now, our donors are grassroots donors. So it's folks that make small dollar donation amounts, primarily online. And so that's the segment that I'm focused on. And currently what we have is I'll do like phone calls for first-time donors, and then on a quarterly basis, I'll do a thankathon where I'll wrangle some of my field colleagues to like join me and just like knock out phone calls to people. We launched this last fall, and it actually we got 2 new donations out of it. And in the like field, they said that, oh, I got a voicemail from someone at your organization. I want to give again. So that was really successful. So right now it's a personal phone call from me, or like quarterly calls from me and my staff. And then I'll do like an annual letter and handwritten cards sometimes for recurring donors.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Abiha. I really, really appreciate that, and great to hear your voice again. All right. So I'll stop picking on all of you. We have lots more discussion to be had here, but let's get into sort of what donor stewardship isn't. We've heard some great examples of donor stewardship tactics from Kayla and Abiha. But let's talk about what it isn't. So donor stewardship is not something that is only for big donors. It is not reserved for the big gifts and the people who make them. Stewardship, Kayla, you made a fantastic point that it's anybody who is stepping into their power through your mission. And that can, depending on what you do, is a lot of things. Like at Progressive Multiplier, we don't take small dollar donations. We're dealing strictly with institutional funders and grantee partners. So we have more limited audiences. So our stewardship approaches are defined by those relationships. But think about your full continuum of supporters when you're defining donor stewardship. It used to be a really old school approach that you only designed a stewardship program for people who were sort of mid-level and above. And that is definitely an antiquated way to look at stewardship now. Stewardship is also not just your onboarding treatment. So I have a lot of nonprofits that I've worked with in the past that when you ask them to define their donor stewardship, it's always, we send an email series for 30 days after they give their gift, or we send a direct mail acknowledgement, and then they go into our regular flow. That's not what stewardship is. It's not an onboarding treatment that kicks off. It's not that thank you or acknowledgement letter. It's also not the annual tax receipt letter. If you still send those and have people giving at that level that tax returns matter. And the other thing, it's not a cocktail party. It's not an event. These all can be tactics within donor stewardship, but they in themselves are not donor stewardship. And I would say at least over the last 20 years, I would say 80% of the groups that I've worked with define stewardship as one of these things. It was their onboarding, it was their annual donor stewardship event, that kind of stuff. So broaden your mind when it comes to how you define donor stewardship, because it's really a program. Just like acquisition of donors is a program that you have to invest in and have a thoughtful strategy around. Donor stewardship is also a program that you have to have a thoughtful strategy around. And it really has 4 things that it has to be rooted in. Your gratitude, it has to accomplish conveying your gratitude for their role with your mission. And again, that may be thanking them for a gift, for their service, for their thought leadership, lots of different things, but the gratitude has to come first. Your fiscal responsibility, if you're dealing with a donor segment, or your responsibility with whatever thing they've given you, time, treasure, whatever it might be, your responsibility with their investment. And then my favorite thing to talk about, your plus their impact. So you as an organization make an impact. You can do that without donors if you have institutional funders or things like that. But there is something amazing and special that you can do only with their support. So really defining that and making that a root of your strategic plan around stewardship is critical. And then their ongoing engagement in giving. So your strategy has to reflect those 4 things. And if it doesn't, and there's a hole there, that's where you start problem solving. The other part of stewardship, as you often hear me say, we can only go as far as fundraisers, as strategists, as our tech allows. So in this case, same thing. The systems dictate how good of a steward you can be. So this means having an actual stewardship procedure. and Jasmine will giggle. I say SOP a lot. We have a lot of SOPs around all of our things, but you have to have an SOP around how you do stewardship. You have to have enough staff bandwidth or volunteer bandwidth or both to do stewardship, or you have to be realistic about what your bandwidth is when you design your program. Budget and tech. So if you don't have money for a cocktail party, that can't be part of your stewardship tactic. But there are lots of cheap things that can be. And same with the tech. You have to be able to segment your donors. You can't make those mistakes of saying thank you for their first gift when they've been giving to you for 10 years. They just were giving to you in a different channel. Things like that. We've all had those experiences with database nightmares. So any questions about what stewardship, donor stewardship, and I usually call it constituent stewardship really is? Jazz, let me know if anything comes across in chat.
We're good.
All right. Quiet crew this Friday. All right. So why is stewardship important outside of go ahead, Jess.
Someone asked, could you say more about SOP? I guess kind of explain.
Oh yeah. I could talk forever about SOPs. So, so standard operating procedure is what that stands for. And when you build strategies, you need to make sure that they are durable beyond your presence at the organization. So strategies that live in your head or processes that you do and that live in your head aren't good. They have to be like, you need to be able as a person to be removed from the organizational mission, and that process keeps going forward without you. In ideal scenarios, you're able to literally pick up that document and hand it to somebody and say, cover this for me. In not so ideal scenarios, I used to work at American Diabetes Association, and I had a colleague who passed away from complications of diabetes very unexpectedly. And we, were in a real conundrum because the 2 lines of business he was in charge of, there was no documentation around how to carry forth the process for those 2 programs. So make sure, and it doesn't have to be anything pretty, it doesn't have to be crazy, it has to be interpretable by another human being. So it's a Word doc, it's a spreadsheet, it's whatever works for you. It's saved in a place that other people can get to if for some reason you can't pass it on to them. So saved on your shared files or a Google Doc or Box, whatever your team uses. But make sure you write down what it looks like. So we'll go into sort of the elements of what a donor stewardship plan entails. Make sure you have those outlined for somebody and here's the cadence of how we roll in doing donor stewardship. Does that answer the question?
Yes. Sorry. And someone had a follow-up about what's a realistic SOP for a development department of 1 or 2 people. But I mean, you kind of describe the framework at least, and you said that you'll map out what a stewardship plan looks like later in the day.
Yeah. And that is true of any fundraising Friday we do. We know we've got organizations on the phone that have 10-person development teams, and we've got literally organizations that are like executive director, development director, program director, all 1 person. So we try to make this really scalable. So you will never hear me come in here and say stewardship is like this many touches and this many this and this many that. I can tell you what the ideal is for a certain kind of organization, but we do what we can and that we can do reliably. So if for you that means an email once a month, great. If that means it's an email once a month and like Abhi has said, a phone call once a quarter to a certain segment, great. But it's just making sure you're realistic, again, about those systems that enable the strategy, people being a core part. Do what you can and be okay with that, because some is always better than none, is sort of the bottom line there. Any other questions, Jess, before I move on?
Yes.
And
apologies for not.
That's what I get for telling you guys you were quiet.
I was going to say apologies for not saying you guys' name when reciting your question. Greg asked any examples or resources for a stewardship SOP template.
We can probably throw one together for you. They're really dependent on what you choose to do as an organization. So I've worked with 1 or 2 person organizations. I've worked with American Heart Association and Paralyzed Veterans of America, and really giant organizations that have 300 affiliates under them. Their stewardship plans all look really different based on what they can do, but I can certainly outline the general contours of like audience segments, cadence, investment, you know, if that would be helpful. I'm happy to do that. But like this plan as written for like Boys and Girls Clubs of America, where Jasmine used to work, is like 30 pages long, versus like Metropolitan Ministries here in Tampa, it's a 2-page doc. So totally depends on the sort of scale of your bandwidth, how much money you're putting behind it, and how much you can automate through your tech. But happy to do a general outline. Go ahead, Jess.
Carlos asked, when thinking about comms, would you have a separate comms plan for donors only?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'm going to put a pin in that one. I have a slide on the comms piece in a couple slides, but Carlos, definitely raise your hand if I don't answer your question on that slide. All right. Anything else? I'm good. Okay. I love the questions, and it makes this so much more just like fun. We like to keep it conversational. And if my content isn't applicable, I want you guys to ask questions. So donor stewardship isn't really about the increased gift. This is not, and I know that a lot of development directors on the phone are like, what did she just say? Donor stewardship is about keeping somebody in the fold. Moves management, that's all about the increased gift and the increased monetary value. Stewardship is about keeping them at the table, in the fold, however you want to say that. Here's what it translates to, this really simple math of if you start with 1,000 folks and you keep the attrition rate is 20%, after 5 years, you're going to have 300 and change left. If you have 60% attrition, you're only going to have 10 of them left. You spend a whole lot of investment getting those folks in the door. And that is wasted investment in a very short amount of time if you don't store them. So just putting the emphasis on keeping them at the table and engaged is critical to your retention, even before you do the monetary piece of, okay, if these are all actual donors and they give it this many gifts a year, that means it's this much money. Especially if you work in a mission where somebody's relationship to your mission can be cyclical. So having worked with a lot of healthcare organizations, we had very dedicated donors that would go dark for a couple of years because of where they were in their disease process, or they were a caretaker and they lost the patient they were caring for, and then are in a, going from caregiver to grief to, then becoming a hugely impactful advocate. So depending on where you work mission-wise, you can have real dark periods, and they may not give for a year or two, and then they may come back and give you a planned gift, or, so again, the retention is the thing that keeps them at the table, even if they're not giving. Does that make sense to everybody? And does anybody want to like throw down about that? Quiet in chat.
I just I found in my work too that, oh, sorry, did I jump in on somebody?
No, go ahead, Kayla, and then we'll go to Nandy.
My bad.
No, you're fine.
I do think that there is like a symbiosis between longevity, between connection and increased in gifts. I think it's important to separate them
Absolutely.
when quantifying. But it's hard for me when I am doing my annual development plan to fully separate those two things as two separate, like that need two separate tactics, so to speak.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's a really good point, especially when you think of it through a budgeting lens, is that, and what I developed over the years with like my clients, I came from the agency world before coming into philanthropy, is that what's the investment for donor upgrade and retention versus what is the investment on keeping somebody active on files. And we would define active by things we could measure, like opening emails, answering phone calls, doing online petitions, showing up at programmatic events, things like that. It was different for everybody I worked with. But they can't give if they're not at the table. And it is awfully far cheaper to keep them at the table than to do that upgrade strategy. So we actually would split that budget almost like 2/3, 1/3 in a lot of cases. You know, and especially, you know, more sensitive around, you know, folks that have a, you know, another good example, I had a client that had a very large mid-level program. And because of the changes in the tax law, those mid-level donors were giving in, we started giving in 2-year cycles instead of 1-year cycles, but we had to keep the brand in front of them for the full 24 months because they were stacking their donations until they could do the tax deduction because they were right on that line. So they had built this huge mid-level program that then was like, oh no, and it sort of shifted into a 2-year cycle. So their stewardship of just keeping them engaged in that interim year was really critical, so that they were top of mind when it came time to do their every other year big tax donation gift.
That's super
Mandy,
interesting.
did you have something you wanted to? Yeah, it was weird, but like when we saw the data emerge, it was like, okay.
No, she didn't have a question.
Mandy, did you have a comment? Okay.
But
Awesome.
Abiha has a
Anybody else,
question.
Jeff?
Abiha asked if what if we get a lot of new donations because of something happening in the news, a rapid response donation? I guess, how do you funnel them into the stewardship piece?
Absolutely. I will get there in 1 minute. That's actually, I have a slide for that. So Abiha, if I don't answer, let me know when I get there.
And Brooke second.
Any other questions?
Oh, no other questions, but Brooke.
Same question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So donor stewardship, keeping them at the table. So crafting a good donor stewardship program. Since we are just looking at the time, and the questions are sort of flowing, and we're not having to, you know, pull them like teeth, we'll just dive into the content and then get to the discussion organically. That seems to be rolling. So the first thing, and this is, you know, in dealing with some of those emergency folks, is really defining audience segments. Just like when you think of donor, you know, approaches, like who are you going to ask what? You deal with the same thing in your stewardship program. Your segments may be the exact same as the way you segment your donors. It may not be, because your stewardship program may go beyond the confines of just donors. Let's say something a little controversial. When it comes to donor stewardship, the donor pyramid is not going to help you much, because the donor pyramid was predicated on people would come in at the base of the pyramid, like through an event, and you would very methodically move them up to become regular donors and mid-level donors, major, and then planned donors. That is not the way donors come in to our organizations on the whole. About 20% of your file will still follow a linear path. It is, you know, it's that Pareto principle, 80-20 rule. Those 20% of people are going to give 80% of your money. They deserve their own plan. We have a whole month dedicated to that mid-major planned giving crew. We will talk about them later. But the way donors come onto your file now is like Abiha and Brooke, you know, had called out, like, we've had a news moment and all of a sudden we have all of these folks. The other thing, people may come in at a higher level donation because of something, an external force that has forced them to give. In healthcare, a lot of you have honor and memorial donors that will come in that act totally differently than other folks on your file. So this is where, you know, communication now is so surround sound. It's dictated by the news and what we see in social media. It's also two-way. So there's a lot of peer-to-peer influence on donor behavior. So that linear progression up the pyramid is not like it used to be. The nonprofit was doing all of the communication about their brand. And now the news is talking about your mission, and social media and peers are talking about, you know, your stuff. So you have far less control over that linear path. I had a friend refer to it as a donor vortex. You could get sucked in at any time and in any place. And I think that's a far more accurate picture. There's still a path, but it's just not that linear stair step that it used to be. So your stewardship has to reflect that. I don't think that personal giving amount is a good base for a stewardship strategy. It's great for your donor upgrade and retention strategy, like their actual gift strategy, but the stewardship is a little bit different. So first thing on building any segmentation strategy, it has to be scalable to what you can do. And this goes back to people in tech, right? So if you can't treat your donors differently, you're a one-person shop, fine. These people are important to us and we have one stewardship approach. That is totally okay. If you've got enough staff bandwidth and a little bit of tech behind it that you can say, the folks who both volunteer and give, we're going to do this for, and the people who just volunteer, we're going to do this for, etc. Great. Do what you can. It will always help. It will never hurt. And remember that this is about sorting the relationship, not the gift value. So look at the whole data set. This is one of my favorite stories to tell of make sure you are not blowing off your $30,000 donor in disguise. So I lost my dad to complications of type 2 diabetes and my fiance to complications of type 1 diabetes, cause that is very, very important to me. I captained a walk team for American Diabetes for 3 years running. The team itself raised over 30 grand each year. So over 3 years, I organized 90 grand for an organization. I did not give a single dollar of my own because I was young and broke. But that was my gift, was I will put together a powerhouse team. I will teach them how to fundraise, et cetera, et cetera. Now, because of the way ADA defined their audience segments for stewardship, because I was not a donor, I was literally dropped from their stewardship efforts because I had never given a dollar. Now that I'm no longer young and broke, I could give them a gift, but I instead give to other organizations who kept me in the fold and who honored the relationship that I had with them. So make sure you are not accidentally, because of your technology or some kind of algorithm or how you've narrowly defined what a donor is, that you're screwing over your stewardship strategy. As I say, upgrade for a donor versus stewardship, totally different disciplines. Does that make sense? And anybody want to talk about that a little? Jazz, all things quiet in chat. Hey, Erica, go ahead.
I'm sorry. This is Erica Buck with Youth Science Institute. And I just want to say that that's a really great point. We are currently in the process of doing a donor stewardship letter. And I was looking at, taking off the people who haven't donated in X amount of years. But now, because of this, I'm rethinking that strategy. So thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there are the realities of like, can you afford to mail everybody? And, if you're doing it more of a high touch like phone, yeah, there's going to have to be a line and you're going to decide how to draw that line. But make sure that when you're doing those, like, well, maybe this person doesn't care about us anymore, sort of because we haven't heard from them or they haven't given, think about the lower investment things you could do. Like maybe you send emails to those folks versus postal letters versus phone calls. So really think about it holistically based on your budget and bandwidth. But really important not to disrespect somebody's relationship with your mission because it can cost you in the long run. Ways to think about segmentation. We've talked about RFM of gifts, recency, frequency, and monetary value. That is as classic fundraising 101 as it gets when it comes to how to segment an audience. It just can't be everything when it comes to stewardship. We've talked about the reasons why. You may want to look at demographics. I have a lot of grantees. I see some of them on the phone where they have more of a youth-centric audience and a parent and educator audience. Those stewardship tactics need to look really different. And you're telling a different story. You got a lot of people who came in through a campaign. You may want to treat those as a separate segment. Like Brooke, I know the Save Our Clinics campaign. Those donors might look very different than your baseline donors, and you may actually want a separate stewardship audience around that because that's what they care about, and it wasn't your brand that brought them in, it was the campaign first. they may actually not know what the organizational brand behind it is. Does that make sense? I'm seeing heads nodding.
But
So go ahead.
So Beth from next door said
Hey, Beth.
there's a $10 donor that left their home to the organization in their will, which was worth over $1 million. So that's a great example. Yeah.
Perfect example. And I, over the last 20 years, I have heard so many stories like that of, this is somebody who gave $20 a year through direct mail. And then all of a sudden they've got a planned gift worth millions. Or I've got a couple of previous clients where children started giving after they lost parents, because it was like they picked up that philanthropic relationship that they had. But, and then all of a sudden the kids started giving at a much higher level out of nowhere. And, so, even though their parents were very low level donor dollars. So stewardship is, I don't want to say that everyone is equivalent in your treatment, because there are going to be you treat your board chair differently than somebody who shows up once a year to stuff envelopes, because their investment in the mission is different and it manifests differently. All I'm saying is make sure you look holistically, and that you are not just looking at monetary value in the moment as an indication of how you treat somebody. Any other discussions here around how to guide meaningful segmentation for your stewardship? All right. And I apologize. My dog is snoring in the background and she is loud today. She has allergies. So if you hear her, that is that. I promise no one's taking a nap in my office. Defining your relationship touch option. So after you really have a meaningful stewardship segmentation that fits your bandwidth and tech, and fits how folks meet you and interact with you, then it's okay, what can we serve them? What experience through stewardship can we serve them? I always like to start this process by auditing your options. Again, one person shop, your options are going to be a far shorter list than a big team. So it may be, I have no budget, this is going to need to be limited to digital. Or I have got no budget, but I've got a kick-ass team of volunteers, so maybe we can extend this to phone calls too. Or one of my board members has a venue that they're willing to give us, and I can get catering in kind, and I can do a stewardship event when we can breathe on each other again. Those kinds of things are when we talk about auditing your options. Those are the conversations you need to have. So I always start this with, what news do you have to share and what story do you have to tell? Nonprofits are all different. Some of you could tell a different story literally every day of the year, and you deal with constituencies where you can always raise up those directly affected stories. You may work in a different kind of nonprofit where you have annual research cycles and you really don't have a lot to report out on in terms of impact so frequently. So really let the story guide the plan. Obviously I'm not saying just talk to them once a month, but if you're in that kind of place where things don't change rapidly and you don't have constituent stories to raise up, really think through what's the unique thing that you're saying to somebody on a regular cadence. Maybe it's, more of an update on the space that you're working in, or maybe it's mini progress reports versus the final tied up in a bow thing, and you let somebody actually see more of the progression reports. So just really think about what kind of story you can tell. It's going to be different for literally every group on the phone. Staff bandwidth and scale. I feel like a broken record in saying this, but can you realistically plan an event? Those are not, I used to be a walk coordinator and do galas and things like that. That is not a light lift. So make sure that if you're going to include live events in your plan, that you've actually got the staff, volunteers, and budget to do so. And if you want to make social media part of your plan, can you keep up with a posting schedule? Because doing a post a month isn't worth the time. So just be realistic and just leave the judgment at the door and say, here's what we can do. Budget, same thing. When you start, and we'll start getting into the more COVID specific parts of this, the budget is really important because of course we can give a virtual lecture, but do we have the appropriate tech to give a large scale virtual lecture, 300 people on the phone? Do you have the right Zoom webinar account versus the Zoom meeting account, and all of those kinds of things. So really think through that. And then of course the channels and tech at your disposal. So, what do you have that you're good at? Is it email? Is it mail? Is it phone? Is it what are the conduits through which you can tell that story? You can make those personal touches, that kind of thing. Any questions on how to do this audit? Go ahead, Jess.
I have a question in chat about kind of those rapid news stories. So what happens too many news stories happening quickly, and by the time the email is crafted, the story is old?
Yes.
And I think perhaps that's where you use social as the place to express if it's a rapid.
Yep. Bingo. So so if it takes too long to craft it, you've got a couple of things to do. So if you're in a predictable response environment, like I've worked a lot with emergency response groups like a Red Cross, those kind of folks that respond to natural disasters, that they actually do the assets ahead of time. Like I live in Florida, we're just a few months out from hurricane season. I know, having had folks like Red Cross as a client before, they will start crafting their Swiss cheese assets of, here's what, if it's a hurricane, here's what we would send out, and we will fill in the name and people affected and anything specific when it comes, but they've done all of the work they can ahead of time. So if you're in that sort of predictable yet responsive in the moment environment, highly recommend that sort of pre-planning. If a news story is one of those hits you upside the head and you've got 8 layers of approvals to get through to get something out the door, that is when social media or text is another, having SMS as a part of your channel mix really help, because they're quicker and shorter. So highly recommend that. The other thing that you can do is, if neither of those are an option, craft your story a little more thoughtfully. So as opposed to you're responding to the news in the moment, let it sit for a day or two, write a blog and send out an email that links to the blog of this is what happened and this is our response, and sort of the forward-looking piece. We did that very purposefully when all of the racial justice uprisings started happening last summer. You saw a lot of funders say we stand in solidarity and we do this. I just wasn't ready, and Jazz and I as a team who run Progressive Multipliers Marketing weren't ready to do that because we didn't know what our response was. So we waited until we had something authentic to say. And we said, here's how we're dealing with this uprising internally with our grantees who have had to pivot. Here's the sort of reflection we're doing as an organization of how are we baking equity into our grant making, and went much deeper into the thing. So it's okay to wait if that help, and that actually we got a lot of really good response off of that. So I think those are the 3 ways you deal with it when it's a sort of news story driven communication and stewardship option. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Anything else, Jazz, or am I driving on?
You can keep going.
Okay. Building your SOP. So everybody's favorite. So this is really the who, when, how, and what. And this is literally how I frame these documents. Doesn't matter if I'm doing one for, a super sophisticated $12 million a year digital program, or if this is for, a local $500,000 a year organization here in St. Petersburg. It's the same outline, just depends on how sassy it gets based on how much you have to spend and how many hands you have on keys. So who's getting what? So actually formally in that document, say here are the stewardship buckets we care about and how we define them and where you find them. So for some organizations, that's going to be a spreadsheet. Some of them, it's going to be, this is how you pull the query out of our database. Or this is the tag you look for in MailChimp. Whatever it is, this is your place to say, here's our stewardship buckets, here's how you identify them. When are they getting that touch? So this is usually some kind of embedded table or spreadsheet where you're literally saying, you know, if you kick off your stewardship process with a sign up, a gift, a volunteer exchange, at like whatever your sort of, when does somebody enter your stewardship stream, and you just write it from there. So it's like a week after they get this, a month after they get this, they get included in these fundraising campaigns. So that's really when you think about that. They get invited to these events, but these people don't get invited to these events. It's okay to not invite everybody to everything. I know in healthcare, we had crews that were just cared about research, and others that just cared about like caregiver concerns. They didn't want to hear each other's content. So whatever your story is that you're bringing, whatever reason somebody is interested in your organization, honor that in how you serve stewardship to them. After you put that table in there that says, here's who's getting what touch when, or what invite when, then it's how are we getting it out the door, posted, or executed? So what's the plan? If you are going to do a stewardship plan, and Carlos, I think this was you who asked, do you have a separate donor comms plan and a separate stewardship plan? It's not separate, it's sort of a sub-track. So it's this stewardship bucket gets this included in this overall fundraising appeal. This stewardship bucket doesn't. This one gets included. So you should really have a master, think of communications as a master calendar with segments that you opt in and out of each touch. And this stewardship piece is sort of a sub piece of that master communication. Does that help? Awesome. So this is really the good gut check of, do you have what it takes to do all you've planned, when you're really talking about like, here's who's in charge of emails, here's who's in charge of setting up an event, that kind of thing. If you have the option of automation, especially for the early parts of stewardship or anniversary parts of stewardship, use them. So as we talked about, stewardship isn't onboarding, but onboarding is a part of stewardship. So when somebody gives a gift and you welcome them as a donor, if you can automate that welcome series or that acknowledgement letter, awesome. Same thing with when somebody's a year into their relationship, or they've given a certain milestone, or they've been a volunteer for a certain number of hours, like whatever you are the important milestones that indicate a deep relationship, you can usually automate those if you have a CRM. So birthdays, another great thing. So sending the like, happy birthday, we're thinking of you on your special day, or anything like that you can automate. Great, definitely look for those easy wins. And then how do you evaluate the effectiveness of your stewardship program? So this is going to be different, you know, depending on what you do. So the way I like to measure stewardship for us, so because we rely on institutional funders, like our gifts are at least a year apart, right? So I can't measure it on their donations. I wish I could. I would love to have them more frequent. But I'm looking at a once a year gift. So the way I measure is, our stewardship doing the right thing? Are they opening emails? Are they responding to us when we email? So like we send mass emails out of like, hey, we just posted this blog, go read it. Are they clicking through and reading the blog? So we actually track that for all of our donors. And if any of them are on the phone, they're gonna laugh. But it's like, okay, I know you opened my email. I know you clicked through on the blog. So you're still engaged, like you still care about the stuff we're doing. If they delete without opening it, I also note that in their records, because that means we're not relevant. And I have to fix that as the managing director. It's my job to then do that next level and say like, hey, can we get a meeting? Can I talk to you about what our grantees are finding out in their experiments? Jazz, what's the question?
Felicia asked, how do you know what a donor is interested in when you offer a lot of different services?
Yep. Couple of ways. Great question, Felicia. So, and a really common thing, right? Everybody does so much. There's both the explicit and implicit data that you're looking for. So the implicit data is setting up your communication so you can spy on the people who are getting them. You will start to notice trends if you send about emails and communications about one program and they open them and they click versus they don't click on other things. Great way to do this is if you send an e-newsletter and purposefully do like one on program A, a story on program B, story on program C, and send that sort of same format with different stories a few times. A lot of times you'll see they're always interested in program A or always in program C. So that's the implicit spying on you data. Which events do they go to and which ones do they opt out of? Which lectures do they go to and opt out of? But you have to sort of like that saying, you get what you fish for. It's the same in any sort of content or experience you serve, is that you have to set it up to get the data you're looking for. So if you want to know if they're interested in this program of the museums, you have to do enough dedicated touches about that program to say, yep, they're biting on that bait or they're not. So that it's a very thoughtful setup process. We do that a lot in our communication. For us, it's around our program areas. So do our funders care more about our environmental justice work? Do they care more about our democracy work? So that's, that is something that we track and purposefully set up those blocks that way. And then there's the explicit data. So survey is always an option. You don't get great response rates, but the ones that you do, the people who actually take the time to say, I'm interested in this, are usually way more valuable in whatever value metric you're measuring. You can do sample sets of, if you have kind of like, here are my mid-level donors, let me do a sample call to 15 of them and see what their program interests are, and then do that sort of, okay, most of my mid-level folks are more interested in this than this. So that's really how I've gotten to that data set. It's never perfect. And you really have to, it's really about setup and watching. Felicia, does that answer the question?
Yes.
Cool. Any other questions before we keep on keeping on here?
All clear.
All right. So after you've done your audience segmentation, the what can you actually offer in stewardship audit, and you then baked it all into your SOP, then it's your gut check moment of, does everything that's sitting there as part of your stewardship program reflect those 4 pillars? Are you going to be able to express your gratitude in every touch? Are you going to be able to show your fiscal responsibility or your investment responsibility in every touch? Are you going to be able to paint that picture of that magic, their gift plus your mission impact? And then are you going to be able to reflect back their ongoing engagement and giving and what you want them to do? So really think about that, because you don't ever want to do stewardship that's insincere. This is sort of your sincerity check of like, don't get into that rut of, I have to send out a stewardship email every month. It's better to send one every 6 weeks if you can't do, or send one every other month if you can't actually do an authentic one. Because insincere stewardship will actually hurt your retention rates. Make sense? All right. COVID. So yes, we are dealing with donor stewardship in a pandemic. I know we're from all across the country. I live in Florida. It doesn't, we're almost 100% open. They're debating on lifting our statewide mask mandates, things like that. I have an immunocompromised husband, so needless to say, we stay in our bubble. But it's, where you are, you may still be very locked down, and there's no chance of even doing an outdoor sort of meeting, anything like that. We have heard everything from our grantees across the country. So please know that these recommendations are written by a Floridian. So we definitely have to take where we are in the country and sort of cultural comfort levels in that part of the country as a part of this. So I want to discuss a little bit just to get a vibe of how the pandemic has upended your approach. I think Khalil, I see a hand up.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, when you're talking about the, try to do a touch once a month or at least every 6 weeks, does that not include like an e-blast that would go out to your whole database, right? Is that part of that touch, or you're saying like there should be a different touch that should go out once a month or every 6 weeks that's specific to?
That's a great question. Yeah, I know, totally get what you're asking. So if you're sending an e-news out every month, every 6 weeks, whatever it is, to your entire file, it's okay to consider that part of your stewardship plan. Where the difference comes in is that think about the segments you've said need a stewardship treatment because of their investment, whether monetary or otherwise, in your organization. So versus your folks who have just given you an email address and they're just there on your file, they need information about what you're doing. Versus your people that you're stewarding, you actually want to show their investment in motion. So if your e-news accomplishes showing their investment in motion, great. It can be considered a stewardship touch. A lot of times we'll conditionalize a block, just even one block on the e-news to tell that more like impact story versus the informational story. So you can do it multiple ways, whether it's conditionalizing text for those segments that need stewardship, whether it's just baking the stewardship copy into what you send the whole file. That certainly doesn't ever hurt. Or you can do a separate touch. Just depends on how you want to tell your story. Khalil, does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Sure, of course. I think that the important thing to remember is that there are no set rules. Anybody who tells you there are set rules to the art part of fundraising and stewardship is wrong. And I will go toe to toe with anybody who says that, like, you have to do it this way. Like, there are lots of ways to make somebody feel important and make them invested in your mission and, deepen that relationship. There isn't one magic recipe. So as long as you're authentic about it and you show their investment in you in motion, you're good. Any other questions in chat, Jess?
Nope.
Okay. Anybody want to talk about how the pandemic has completely upended their stewardship approach? I'd love to get a real life example. I can certainly say from Progressive Multiplier, we have not met with a donor in a year, which is really weird. So yeah, our last meeting was March 4th. And yeah, that was it. So the lack of ability to do true face-to-face stewardship for us and be able to midway through a grant go and actually show our funders' investment in us in action has been bizarre. So that's our big headline. Anybody else? Felicia?
Yeah, I mean, similarly, we used to have a ton of just in-person events, fun content that were, in some cases specifically for donors, or, to have our board engaged in stewardship, an opportunity for them to invite their, the donors that they're stewarding to come and enjoy something with them. We used to do those specific donor ones quarterly, and then other events monthly. There was something to do at the museum every single month, plus some bigger events throughout the year. And obviously none of those things have been happening at all. We've been able to do virtual stuff with some members, but it's also really impacted our board's engagement with donor stewardship. They basically don't feel empowered to do those types of touch points or stewardship actions at all anymore. So that's a big change for us.
That sucks. Have you been able to take any of the board's investment virtual in terms of like having them call donors or, just do any of those touches, or is that just not where their heads are?
That's just it's not where they're at. They're starting to come back, but yeah, getting them virtual for monthly meetings or for, board meetings has been a process. So they're not there yet.
Enough of a struggle. I hear you. Danielle, what about you?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we learned a lot about our donors through COVID in pivoting, like shifting the engagement that we did. So we immediately, took all of like our in-person touch points and like tried to make them virtual, especially through email. And one of the biggest things we learned, I think through COVID, was just that like email was not going to work for a lot of our donors. Everyone had like the heavy inbox fatigue, and especially in those months in like the middle of 2020, between like May and June, which is when we really try to kind of like reach out to our donors and see how they're doing and gear up for the next year. And so we actually found that we learned more about like which donors were comfortable receiving mail. And so we started doing letters. And it also taught us about, especially for donors who were either working from home or they're home with kids, like things that are important to them, things that they need, what kind of gifts they appreciate. And so we really kind of got the ball rolling and sending more things through the mail. And also phone calls turned out to be really special to a lot of donors. When they received a phone call from us, they were like, oh, wow, like, I'm so glad you called me. So yeah, we did a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard that a lot from our grantee partners of, having like, especially the ones that had like face-to-face Canvas folks, and they turned them into calling all their donors just to check in, not from a revenue generation, but just to call and say, hey, how you doing? That was incredibly effective. So yeah, and I think that still is applicable. Because we're not in a normal place yet. And I don't think we're gonna be until fall at the earliest, anybody's guess. Kayla, what you got?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say our stewardship has really changed in the sense that, it's about relationships and how those relationships can take form. Like the tactics have certainly changed, we use a peer-to-peer funding model around what was our in-person event, of which our board is about half of these kind of fundraising captains, and then some of our major donors are the rest. And usually they come to the event, they fill a table and invite their networks to connect with the work through giving. But since we couldn't do that, we took it all online. I have to say, I wasn't so sure. We have some older board members and I was like, I feel like I'm setting up for some hard times, but they proved this millennial super wrong.
That's awesome.
But we did have to, the trick was we did have to create an ask that was much more catered to meeting the crisis. And kind of, getting these captains the toolkit they needed to be able to reach their networks. We decided we need a really clear, crisp, like precise ask, like what is the problem together, which wasn't the case with our event. It was more general about the program.
Yep. And thank you for teeing like the next part of the discussion up so well, because really, Jazz, we got more?
Yeah. Abiha asked,
okay, bring it.
Can you share some examples of ways for board members to support stewardship?
Oh, yes. Absolutely. So, and we did a session on board stuff over the last month. So it would be, if you haven't checked out those recordings, let us know, we'll get them to you. Had some fascinating discussion there, but I think the board can be such a toolkit, part of the toolkit when it comes to stewardship. I think that obviously phone calls and really getting them to phone bank can be critical. I think hosting when they can, the smaller events. And I know that you work with a lot of more youth-oriented folks and college campuses and things like that. Hosting those sort of, my niece is involved with a group, and the board hosted sort of very casual kind of happy hour chat about, the work that was going on. So I think it's really culturally what fits for the organization. But my approach with the board is, we're really honest with our board members of what we need going in. And so if, just like we talked about the give get, that you have to be really blunt about, I think stewardship is also part of that of, we want you to actually talk to donors, and we want you to talk to, if it's not donors, constituents that are a key audience for us that we want to steward and show their investment in impact. So Abiha, if you want to dig deeper, given your situation, feel free to give me a call.
Hi, this is Janelle.
All right.
From Advancing Justice LA.
Hey, Janelle.
Hi. I was just thinking about board engagement and that question. And one of the things that we have been trying to do is actually more strategically engage our board alumni. And we haven't gone, I mean, we have, I think, something like 100 board alumni from the beginning of our time, but we did recognize that a handful of them were more frequently giving, but had lapsed. And what we did was ask 2 of our longer serving board members to reach out to specific board alumni. And so we helped provide a more targeted way for them to connect with former colleagues because they served with them. And actually that resulted in, you know, each of those persons who were outreach to gave and gave handsomely. It was a time where we had not actually thought about doing something like that, but would be something that's, it's like very low hanging fruit, because if you're a former board member, you've already been affiliated and support the organization. And then to the point of like stewardship, and I'm sure some people have done this, but you know, ask their donors or major donors to coffee. I did something last year that was kind of a little bit different. I saw a major donor who was connected to our new CEO, and I just asked her if we could have, you know, a chat with Boba. And actually, I think I don't know if I talked about this before, but I just delivered through Postmates a drink to her house, and I got one for myself, and we just enjoyed that together while catching up. And that was just kind of another extra little step to engage that donor.
I love that. And yeah, that is, Janelle, that's such an awesome example of like, one of the reasons I love fundraising is the art and science of it, is that, you know, yes, we can all do models and spreadsheets and figure out segmentation. And then there is the art part of like, hey, let me deliver you a boba through Postmates and let's chat over Zoom and just catch up. That it's that touch that is meaningful. And that's really dependent on sort of who are you trying to steward, you know, what is that appropriate in the culture of your organization and those kinds of things. But really don't ever let standards be a, you know, like we do stewardship this way. Really look for those moments of authenticity. You know, that if you didn't have the pandemic on top of it, what would you do? You know, that's awesome. Jazz, anything else in the chat? I know
Nope, good to go.
We're good. All right. So the first thing I encourage everybody to do during our weird COVID times, and this is something to keep doing, is does your approach to stewardship segmentation hold for your audience? Because totally depending on your mission and what you do, you could have a whole new set of folks at the table that are important to you. These are just a couple of examples. So if you have done any kind of emergency campaign and that has brought you volunteers or donors that may look completely different and have a different interest in your mission than the rest of your audience, that's something that you need to think through with the stewardship hat on. So we work with Casa de Maryland, and they are not a direct service organization, but they stood up an emergency campaign to literally help house and feed immigrants in the, you know, DC, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia area that were at risk because of the pandemic. And so they got a lot of donors in, both corporate donors as well as individual donors who were like, yes, I want to feed a family. And now they're like, okay, but we don't do that work. We do systemic change work and like lobby for DACA and things like that and TPS. So how do we take this group that came in with this catalyst of I want to help this family to educating them about systemic change work, showing them how these people are affected, like, so, and those are, they never had to deal with folks that didn't care about systemic change work within their constituent file. So that's been a real journey for them. New reasons to become involved. So any of the racial justice groups with a national presence, like Black Lives Matter, we work with Repower, any of those groups saw an onslaught of people signing up for their email list, making donations over the summer and into the fall. And they've all had to culturally say, where do these people fit in terms of the journey we want to take them on? How into the fold do we want to bring them into the organization? Or are they not going, are they people that we assume don't want to have an ongoing relationship with us? So those are the things that like the pandemic and any big news moments really force you to confront. Segmentation that has emerged because of the pandemic. So I don't know if Grassroots Ecology is on the phone. They're one of the first Resilience Initiative grantees we worked with last fall. But a lot of their major donors, a lot of their high invested volunteers are actually work in these conserved, protected land spaces that they carry out their mission in. All of that shut down. So there was a completely new, folks that, yes, they may be high donors, they may not be, but they had not a brick and mortar, but such a face-to-face model that new segment of outside of our major donors that we literally used to see on a daily basis, what do we do with them now? From keeping them as involved with our mission. So they've done a lot of those like video tours, kind of walk and talk around the areas. And then the other thing to think about is any groups with your existing segmentation approach that you see a behavior change in because of the pandemic. So I was talking to one of the Resilience Initiative grantees the other day, and she mentioned that she had seen a big drop off in her sustainer giving. Just because they dropped off doesn't mean that you stop storing them, obviously, but you want to store them in a different way. It's not that every month, thank you for your recurring gift, etc. You have to think through, what does this mean? Because they're in a financial place that was one of the things they cut to save their own budget, in this time. So those are the things to really think through there. When you think about, is the pandemic changing how you do your segmentation? Hey guys, did somebody come off mute because they wanted to chat? Okay, holler if you have questions. So just like you need to look at your segmentation with the pandemic lens on it, and make sure that those segments are still really authentic about who and how you need to store. You also need to think about your touches, right? We're no longer having cocktail parties. We're no longer taking, our major donors that have connections to leadership out for coffee. So this is, how can you replace those elements, or should you replace those elements is really the question to ask yourself. So there are some programs that can be moved fully virtual, like Janelle, brilliant idea to replace the coffee chat with a virtual one with meal delivery. Love that. So that's an easy virtual switch, but are there things that you should replace entirely? So if you have like an auction event, that's pretty easy to take virtual. You're gonna make less money probably, but it's easy to take virtual. But if you have, just everybody gets together and has dinner as an event, that's really hard to replace virtually and still get the same vibe. So one of the most brilliant switches that I saw was Equality Florida is a partner of ours, and they do galas. They had to take them virtual in the spring. And instead of a gala here in St. Petersburg, they did an exclusive live stream chat with the mayor around some LGBTQ initiatives within the city, and sort of a panel of local folks that had kind of skin in the game around LGBTQ issues that were at play here locally. And it was just this almost fireside chat vibe. And it just gave the people that they were stewarding a totally different experience than with the gala, but still had a really meaningful event, but they didn't try to replace the gala experience. So I think that's where you really have to think, should we replace it, or can we take it virtual? And really, I've seen some awful virtual events because people didn't have that gut check moment. So please do that. If you're going to go virtual, Janelle gave us that great example, and I giggled because this is what I've done for our virtual happy hours. I've actually sent folks the Camp Craft cocktails, which are ingredients and you add your own liquor at home. But these are not terribly expensive and easy to send across state lines and everything else, but like basically sending somebody a cocktail party in a box for Zoom. So that's something that we've done. So think about what components that you can bring to the virtual world that still translate well, and then alter your content appropriately. So a long Zoom lecture nobody has tolerance for anymore. Like, just no. After a year of this, we are zoomed out, right? So alter your content. Maybe it is breakout rooms. Maybe it is you actually get more creative and have interspersed like art. You know, do you have entertainment in some kind of virtual event that you do? I saw one of our grantees did that. They actually did sort of lecture plus concert and had a couple of speakers with really short, like, 7-minute speaking pieces. And then they had, different local musicians come on. And it was a really lovely thing. And you didn't feel like you were Zooming forever. So really think about the content translation. But because you are producing all of this weird new content, because we've been forced to go virtual, capture it and leverage it where you can. So like those performances or lectures, make sure you're recording them and doing video snippets in your social. Those become part of your stewardship plan. Send them out in those emails, or, if you've got something, that where you can do screen captures and even say like, here, look at this thing we did, and put it in a direct mail piece. Like, all of that's on the table, but just translating what you're doing. I got a great direct mail piece the other day from Girl Scouts here in West Central Florida, and they had done pictures of their Zoom screens of the girls doing this this activity with some female CEOs. It was fascinating, and I was like, it was great to see that and actually see my support in action and how they're doing something that you think of as so face to face in this virtual world. And they had great quotes from what the CEOs thought and what the girls thought. And that was just in a letter, and I loved it, and that meant something to me as a donor. So really think about how to leverage that content and those experiences that you're creating. The other thing, I want to be really sensitive to time, is to be authentic to the now, and don't hesitate to be vulnerable in how you're speaking through your stewardship. This is not a time to slap on the "we're doing awesome and everything is great." We know that's not true, right? Even if your organization weathered the financial storm well and is still weathering it okay, this has not been normal, and we can't fake it for our supporters that we're trying to steward. So make sure that you're talking about how the organization's changed. Like, we're all working from home. We're looking forward to opening in April, where, here's how our programs have changed, and here's what's going to come back online in the next 6 months. Like, their impact and their investment in you as it comes alive in 2020 and 2021 is different than previously. So make sure you give them an honest picture of where their investment went. That's really, really important. And if, because of the things in the pandemic and the uprising for racial justice, your work changed, like you're doing co-campaigns around solidarity work for racial justice groups or anything like that, highlight that too, that, your mission is a living, breathing thing that is moving with the time. So just be really authentic with how you are stewarding your donors and the people who care about you and what you're talking to them about right now. All right. That was a really full 90 minutes. Any parting questions, thoughts, etc.? We obviously have another session on this, so this conversation isn't over, but would love to hear if anybody has any final thoughts. Jazz, anything coming across?
Nope, just some thank yous. Really helpful.
Well, thank you, guys.
Sorry. If you guys have sample SOPs, if you have sample SOPs that you think are particularly strong that you would be willing to share, it'd just be great to see how people formatted that.
Sure. And since we've had that question a few, like in the chat and everything, I'm happy, like maybe that's how we start out our session on the 19th of like, just a real working example, and then dive into any case studies. And if anybody has any requests for our next session, it doesn't have to be case studies. It can be pure discussion. It can, we have total control over what we design, which means you tell me what you want. So just shoot me an email if you have a thought about where else you want to take this conversation on donor stewardship. I'm happy to do it. And it seems like what an SOP should look like would be a great thing to go through. Anything else before we sign off, guys?